Hi, my name is Diana Niepce. I'm a dancer, choreographer, and author. I'm here to talk today with Ashley Shew, and I'm a white cis woman seated in a wheelchair. Although people don't see my wheelchair, I have a black blouse and a necklace and dark eyes and hair. My sign name is, and my pronouns are she, her. So I'm very happy today to talk with you, Ashley. Ashley Shew is a leading scholar at the intersection of disability, philosophy, and technology. She is an associated professor in the Department of Science, Technology, and Society at Virginia Tech, where she researched how technologies are imagined, designed, and experienced from the perspective of disabled people. Author of Against Technoableism, Rethink Who Needs Improvement, a groundbreaking book that challenged narratives and ableist assumptions about the relationship between technology and disabled people. Beyond writing, she leads Justice Tech, funded by Mello Foundation, which is creating the Disability Community Technology Center, a space for disabled-led technology, education, and advocacy. She also received the National Science Foundation Career Award for her project Disability Experience and Technological Imagination, and her work blends philosophy, ethics, and life experience to push back against stereotypes like seeing disability as something to fix, and instead highlights disabled innovation, community, and agency. Ashley Shew is reshaping how we think about technology, accessibility, and disability. So I think for that, it's a very important figure nowadays for us to bring here to this conversation. So thank you, Ashley, for coming to talk with us.
Thank you so much, Diana. I'm so excited to be talking with you. My name is Ashley Shew. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman in the darkest green top you can imagine, which is kind of reading like black, and some angular green earrings to go along with a yellow background behind me. If we were in person, you might notice that I'm wearing a prosthetic leg, but it is not currently on camera. I also have hearing aids tucked behind my ears, and I am a technologized disabled person. And I really am excited for this conversation at the cross section of technology, art, and disability experience. Thank you so much.
Sorry, sometimes I mistake these Zoom settings. So I've been researching a lot about your work, so it's absolutely inspiring, and also it's making to rethink my own practice and how I deal or connect around technology and my disability, and also the community that I've been trying to connect, in particular in Lisbon or in Portugal, that I feel it's still a bit different from the States, the way the cultural sector or even the cultural hierarchy works here. So I was reading your book, and one of the things that I understood, or I can quote from one of your articles, is technology failure to serve disabled people is ultimately a failure of imagination. So later on, you say to become disabled is to be exposed to a barrage of techno-optimists' rhetorics about overcoming the state of your body. Recovery means not only reaching a certain level of old abilities, but becoming even better than you once were by consuming the latest technologies. From TED Talks to news articles to commercials that feature Paralympics and technologized disabled bodies is offer a site of redemption for broken people. So it makes me to rethink and to understand what is these concepts of ableism and techno-ableism that you talk and that you develop so wise in your articles and books.
Oh, that's so kind. When I think about becoming disabled, because part of the writing of this book Against Technoableism that came out 2 years ago, almost this month, where I, when I became disabled, people were trying to be very kind. I was going through cancer treatment at the time, and I got a lot of people like sending me like videos of very exciting prosthetics. Some of them were arm prosthetics, which not really my type. But like everyone wanted to say things about how advanced prosthetics are, as if, I mean, my biggest worry was dying from cancer. The leg amputation was a thing that was also happening, but wasn't nearly as scary as sort of the longer picture that I was looking at. And people were trying to be really positive. Um, but it was always in terms of technology that the positivity was offered. And and prosthetics are great. They're also not great at times too. I think, being technologized as a disabled person is never as good or as bad as the world imagines it to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I read it actually a lot of your articles, not as much as I would like to, but the world is very capitalistic and we don't have time for everything. But I was reading a lot about the idea of mobility and how you adapt yourself in different urban contexts, and how we move inside our house and how we move outside our house. And I feel very connected when you say about these videos, because when I became disabled in 2014, I think it was the same time as you, but and then I receive a lot of videos of Paralympics or people doing amazing and remarkable things with wheelchairs or prosthetics and crutches, and even dancers and artists that do remarkable things around that. But I feel like I never found this kind of relation or connection with my wheelchair or with my crutches, or how do I move. So it's very funny how people think they are supporting giving all these opportunities or giving access to this information, and how far away it becomes from what I really desire, or what really makes me move, and how comfortable I am to move in a different way. So I felt this very connected about the way you think and explain these subjects. So I'll leave you.
No, I mean, I love that we have been disabled the same amount of time, like the sort of processes and adjustment. I feel like when you're new and disabled, like you were thrown in such a way in your life. And, 11 years out, we both are now. It's part of our everyday experience in ways that are really not captured, not understood, not, the disability narratives that were usually offered offer really limited frames for thinking about disabled people. And no one's life looks like any of those limited frames, but they're constantly projected upon us. I think people, want to give you a little bit of positivity or inspiration in sending these nice things. And it's like, I don't really care about running. Right? Like, thank you for this picture of a person on running blades. I'm happy for them. But it's no more relevant to me than a picture of someone on two legs running. Running's not a task I care about. Right? This is just, it was bad when I had two legs. I'm not going to like pay extra to do it now. Right? And now it's more costly to run if I want to do it. But it's never been a good thing. I'll put up a slide for a second about the sort of larger project that I'm doing with technoableism. So my project, which I call Against Technoableism, is really diagnosing this problem of technoableism. It's a phenomenon where helpers and medical professionals and engineers offer their expertise to help disabled people, where ableism is re-emphasized through the technological and medical solutions offered. And sometimes these are, fancy running blades. Sometimes they are souped up wheelchairs or exoskeletons, which a lot fewer people use or want. It's wed to this idea that disabled people's bodies or minds, in the case of a lot of non-apparent disabilities, are sort of calling out for intervention, and that we need technologies in order to be redeemed, to be good enough, to be worth including. Like we have to try hard enough and get the right technologies to be allowed to go places in society. With the background assumption, this is why it's ableism. The background assumption is still that disabled body minds are broken, suboptimal, inferior, and calling out for help. And what techno-ableism means in most people's lives, most disabled people's lives, is sort of a larger misunderstanding. I don't spend every waking moment as a disabled person hoping for better technologies to improve my life. I like lots of technologies that help me do different tasks in the world, but it's not this sort of redemption, and it shouldn't be in the way things are painted. So I think about this as like one subtype of ableism, which is a sort of larger ideal. Fiona Kumari Campbell calls ableism this sort of trajectory of perfection. And I like that, like this imaginary idea that you have to be perfected in all of these sorts of ways in order to be good enough. And disabled people don't meet all of those ways, but most people don't either, right? But it's sort of pushed on disabled people in a way that it's not necessarily pushed on non-disabled people to the same degree.
I think also it's very much about what we are projected in society around this idea of the utopic body and the utopia of the perfect life and the utopia of a happy life experiencing the world. And I feel it's so much failing about what it really means about having a body, being a body, and how diverse is actually the human body and experiencing the world.
When I think about it in relationship to like belonging, right? If you're of the like perception that, well, even if you just don't think about disability very critically and you assume like the positionality of the world, so many things are built in ways that are hostile to disabled people being there. And then it's seen as like a failure of the disabled person not to have the right technologies to get into that space, or not pushing hard enough to overcome their disabilities, when we are continually creating sort of an architecture. This idea of trajectory of perfection also involves, notions of like symmetry and the use of different like beautiful stairways, which most of us won't enjoy in the same way that other people will. And I feel like this trajectory of perfection ends up playing into individual disabled people's lives, but sort of like the way in which we continue to design things around us and even our ideas about beauty and its relationship to function. I would much rather have an ugly functional space, than one that has all of these sort of ideals about what architecture should be. But
Yeah,
still,
this is a huge struggle we still are fighting around architecture, at least in Portugal, because there are still some major famous architects say very not nice things around accessibility. So this is a huge fight. I was reading one of your articles and you talk about an experience that you were going to have a first meeting with a colleague in the university and someone parked in a disabled park and it was raining. So then you decided to climb some stairs and then actually you arrived to the door of the cafeteria. I think it was something like this. And but then you needed to wait a bit for your shoes to dry or for your legs to dry and to go to meet the person. And then I was with my friend yesterday and one of the things we were talking, it was like she has a prosthetic and she was saying, oh, I'm so scared of walking in the street and fall down and then not being able to come up and then to receive help from a stranger. And I was really having the same feeling, although I'm a quadriplegic, but one of the things that I don't walk in the street is I'm so afraid of falling and then not being able to stand up. So then this is one of the things that I really don't do because this fear becomes such a nerves thing. And although you have crutches or prosthetics or walkers or different ways of moving, it's still not safe or it's still not really improving the mobility of people. So I don't know, I was wondering if you can share something around this, because it's something so much about life experience.
Well,
Oh,
I think some of this is actually getting worse in the context of technology, right? When we have more like sensors and surveillance in ways that are meant to read bodies, but read bodies when they're moving in expected ways. A lot of disabled people's bodies don't end up appearing as expected. I think about how wheelchair users are just shorter when moving through a crosswalk, and little people as well. But like this sort of the way in which, at least in the United States, cars keep getting taller and harder to look over the hood, and it's getting like substantially more dangerous because of the way we're building infrastructure. Um, and this goes for, when we're talking about sort of automated vehicles as well that have sort of that are supposed to recognize pedestrians. A lot of that is with a very specific idea of what a pedestrian looks like. And so that people with extra, I'm going to say extra legs because that's what crutches are. So people with extra legs, and people with, who don't move at the right cadence. So I limp and I think about like what it is to have my body in ways like I negotiate this even when I'm like passing someone on a sidewalk. I look like I'm about to walk into their way in a way that like that's just how my body moves, but I'm giving off the wrong social cues, to have sort of the same safety. I might be gazed at too hard, right? Like, what is she doing? Is something wrong? Is she drunk? These sorts of things might become questions, if you just see the top of my body and you don't see the lower half, coming at you down the street. And this plays into, being overlooked. So you're both scrutinized, but also people don't want to spend too long like gazing at you. That ends up filtering through a lot of our technologies as well. And we think about, oh, with technological improvements, things will be better for disabled people. A lot of current technological improvements, that sort of stereotype human beings' bodies to track them and understand them and surveil them and follow them through airports and these sorts of things, end up being far worse, for all sorts of disabled people. There are plenty of non-apparent disabilities like autism where people might stim and move their bodies in different ways as well. But it means that we are both standing out and being misunderstood and misread at the same time.
yeah, I still feel like technology is very much connected to create efficiency to the human body. So for some reason, it's really connected to this neoliberalism movement and into create these very efficient machines that remove identities from the bodies. So um, I don't know. I feel like every time I try exoskeletons, I try all these machines, and then I still go to a disabled toilet in Portugal. And most of the times, my problem is I'm so small that the sensors don't reach me. So the light is always off. So I'm all the time kind of trying to do the things in the dark, and then it's really hard. So then people think no one is there, so they start kind of, I'm gonna break the door. So it's really strange how these things happen to help or how it's proposed to help, but then also the expertise are always non-disabled people. So the things don't really actually work sometimes. But I let you follow your thinking.
Oh no, I mean, what you're bringing up, I mean, it makes us more vulnerable in ways no one intends, but also the sort of lack of imagination and absolute ignorance of embodied experience with disability leads to this, and it leads to it so often. Like in so many built things, there's sort of an idea of what human beings like are mapped to be, and very few people actually correspond to that, but disabled people almost never do in ways that, I can't even, I haven't had the experience of not turning on light because I reach a certain height. Right. But I'm still, that is such an interesting example, but I feel like these sorts of things happen in ways that until you experience it for yourself, these experiences aren't usually represented in the wider world. We have lots of stories about disability, and technology that don't really get us onto, you know, what it is to actually have these experiences. So in my slide deck, and in my book, I talk about like common tropes around disability. So you and I are talking about our embodied experiences of being neglected in particular ways or unplanned for or, you know, designed in a hostile way for. I think a lot of this comes from the way we treat disability and tell stories about disability broadly. I'm really excited when I get to talk to disabled artists and writers and creatives because the sort of representation of disability is so much more interesting. So I have I talk about them as common tropes around disability. This is from sort of disability studies work broadly, talking about like how disabled people have been represented. One of them, there are 5 tropes that I usually talk about. They could all be subdivided and reclassified. So these are just sort of guidelines and not an exhaustive list. The first one is pitiable freaks. Often we talk about disabled people as um, objects of pity, or that they're so different and freakish that they have to be held at bay. So I think about the history of sideshows and freak shows in the US and Britain where disabled people were literally on display, sometimes narrated by doctors. This was supposed to be interesting and educational. We often forget that part of freak shows, but also different charities that try to make disability seem so sad in order to raise money. There have been some classic examples of that. The second one is moochers and fakers, and I feel like so many people's lives are really held back by this particular trope. If you are disabled and asking for assistance, if you're disabled and can't work, if you're disabled and need health care, all this mood, if you're disabled and are in an educational context and need a different format, I mean, all of these things, there's sort of pushback where people say, do you really need that? Or we need to see your documentation to believe you. And of course, your documentation is never you describing what you need. It's always some medical professional in a process that Ellen Samuels calls biocertification, where you need a medical professional to sign off on some facts about your life and what you need. And the fun part is our physicians are not trained to know what disabled people need, besides like medication and a prescription to physical therapy, right? They don't actually know how I do my job. Getting my doctor's opinion on accommodations I might need to do my job, other than sort of the obvious, where I have a mobility disability, it would be good for me to be able to get to my classroom, are just completely lost.
This is really my struggle at the moment because usually doctors don't have a quadriplegic ballerina, so they really don't understand how you work with. And since I've been disabled since the past 11 years, now the body is deteriorating through my work that is also very avant-garde and around live art. So I feel like this is really, I go to a doctor, do an exam, and they ask me, are you really a ballerina? How you do it? It's not possible. And these stereotypes are so violent when you live this every day. So
Yeah, it is. It's something. I don't think there are very many universal disabled experiences. I mean, I think we all have very different embodiments, but I think this is one, the sort of do you really do that? I don't believe you. Or do you really need that? And the need one is the one where so many disabled people are kept in poverty, not given appropriate health care, um, not given, sometimes are placed in educational contexts that don't make sense for their needs. All of these things can, intertwine with some of this biocertification where we think we think we need these sort of objective measures from the outside instead of actually hearing from the person about what they need and what they do. Um, it's belittling in many ways. The third trope that I usually talk about is bitter cripples. So much of our representation in like classic plays and literatures is that if you see someone in sort of a classic theater experience who has a facial scar or is missing a hand, that's going to be a villain. Right. Like disability is written in as a metaphor, as a character. Like it shows that it shows the moral corruption of the character without any more context, right? I think about some of like Peter Pan and Captain Hook, and Captain Hook is why a lot of hand amputees don't use hook tools, even though they're really useful. Like at least in the United States, children's literature, everyone encounters Peter Pan and Captain Hook is scary, and so you have little kids encountering hand amputees who scream and go, "I'm scared," from a disabled person existing outside in the world, and discouraging a particular technology in the process. So often our bodies and minds are used as metaphors by art in the wider world, often, from non-disabled people in ways that villainize us. And it means that when disabled people speak up about injustice or speak up about individual problems they're having, they're depicted as complainers, right? You're not like handling this properly. You haven't gone through the proper systems. You're speaking out of turn. And some of that has to do with we don't want to hear you speak at all. Um, these sorts of things play out. I also think about the shameful sinners trope where disabled people, sort of dovetailing from this sort of bitter cripples, disabled people who are complaining about something are often depicted as shameful sinners too. But it can happen outside of that cast as well. I think about the way in which the AIDS epidemic was talked about people's sinful lifestyles causing HIV and AIDS, which is not the case. But also there's the way in which that got like read, and that allowed people to not care, to not think about funding necessary and needed treatments. I think about the ways in which this moral overcast and reading HIV as sin played into like a lot of people's deaths ultimately, right? Because if you can't even talk about it, you can't do an awareness campaign, you can't prevent the spread of this disease. And I see it playing into how people talk about diabetes for type 2 diabetes, and sort of in misunderstanding type 1 diabetes as well, that people will talk about, people bringing on their own disabilities and deserving what they get. Um,
I think also the silence of not talking about disability or not perceiving disability uh, in the right way on social media or on TV, or I don't know, even the narratives in the dramas or in the, especially in theater or dance, when this is not, the representation is still, I think, so needed to people to also understand better what is to live with a disability. So yeah,
yeah.
this is being a struggle at the moment here in Portugal. So to understand the needs of that and also to shift the way we think about disability or disabled people.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about disability and we cast disabled people as sinners, it allows for a particular type of neglect and also a particular type of intervention that does a lot of the same things that technoableism does. We're going to redeem you. One's a spiritual redemption, one's a technological redemption, but it still follows the same sort of like narrative arc. You are this person calling out for help in some way. And we might look the other way, right? Because maybe you deserve it. But also, it allows for particular types of religious um, intervention in a way people might not want. I know, like, particularly, I don't know if you've encountered this as a wheelchair user, but I read lots of other disabled people's writing where, just existing in public as a disabled person will lead someone to come say they're praying for you. Now, you could be 30 years into your disability
Yeah.
and be okay with yourself. And I have one friend who was like just sitting at a bus stop with cerebral palsy, and someone's like, "Can I put you on my prayer list?" And she's like, "Sure, but like I also think I'm made in God's image." And then she missed her bus to explain to the stranger that she was made in God's image as much as he was. as a disabled person, and that's hard for some religious narratives to accept.
But always feel like I should explain this to people when something happens like that. But then I'm also like, why doing that? You know, like I'm tired. I just want to be invisible and live my life in a most normative way. But then, you know, if every time I catch an Uber, because usually I go by Uber to places, and the Uber puts some kind of religious tape or something. So every time I feel I'm being kind of in a kind of ceremony to trying to heal me. So it's always a fun travel.
It's, I don't think non-disabled people realize how obnoxious they are with some of these things. And it's not like I have lots of non-disabled friends, and family members, and so this is not to knock everyone, but I don't think they can see like the amount that this happens and how it becomes obnoxious. Like, yes, one day you could have a whole conversation, with a stranger about these things, but that's not something you can do several times a day, right?
And
The amount
every
of it
day,
out there.
and every day I feel you don't have the energy or ability to deal with some kind of things that are very violent every day. So
Yeah, no, and there is a violence to it, and it's one that I think is really underappreciated by even the stories that get told about disabled people, the sort of violence that enters into our lives with this sort of stereotyped views about what we are and what we need. Oh, I still have up the slide, and I have one more common trope, and that's inspirational overcomer. So we're supposed to be inspiring if we're doing our jobs correctly, but disabled people shouldn't exist simply for non-disabled consumption, right? I'm not here to inspire people to take up running, which of course is the common image of people using prosthetic limbs that enters into social media and gets shared.
and nowadays they are very much connected to fashion, the prosthetics also. So if you need a prosthetic, you should have this most beautiful and amazing, not very useful or actually good for your body, but yeah, people still implies that.
Yeah. No, the way the technology ends up linking into each of these things is pretty significant. I think about it in terms of tropes about support and care that include technology. So with pitiable freaks, we often end up seeing disabled people and thinking that they should be ashamed for asking for things, right? That these are supposed to be the objects of our pity, and that any minor regard deserves significant praise. I think about this, like the people who make fancy prosthetics and like make the news are like, oh, these people are, saving these, these poor amputees, where most of us can't afford anything like that. And it's not as if a prettier leg is going to significantly like change my life. I might like it. There are occasions in which I would like different colors or designs or things like that, but it doesn't have the amount of media space that's covered by this
So
versus the
some
impact on
people
actual people is so different.
some people just don't feel really connected with a prosthetic actually. So I don't know, like me with my wheelchair, I never found one that I feel like, okay, this is the rock and roll Diana wheelchair, so some people found another way to move in the house that it might be better than to use a prosthetic, but the treatment is very different from society when you are standing or when you are seated or when you are using crutches or a walker or wherever. So
Well,
um,
and sometimes these technologies can get you more pity than others. If I'm on crutches, people are much happier to interact with me than if I'm using a walker. Like it is like I'm still standing in the same, like my body's just as tall, crutches versus walker. I really like the wheeled walker with like the rollators. I use that at night and anytime at home when I'm not wearing my prosthetic leg, and it's great. I have a little platform I can sit
I
on. I
was
can.
thinking about how you use it, and I was thinking it's really funny actually, because it's also the same way, like kind of we found our ways that we feel like we move more smooth around the world And in different contexts, we do differently. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's always strange. People can be very weird and they think you're doing better if you're using one type of technology than another, even though you might be using it because you're in less pain that day and it's not a matter of like what you're capable of. So many of these things end up pushing in different ways. And when we talk about moochers and fakers, disabled people are often denied access or appropriate accommodation or are deemed unworthy of accommodation or are seen as fakes, like you don't get anything. You don't count as disabled in ways that you might be better supported in healthcare, but in educational contexts as well, and work accommodations. For brittle cripples, when we talk about support and care and technologies, disabled people are often seen as not appropriately grateful or just complainers who don't deserve our regard or care. And this can play out in really horrible ways for people who need things to survive and who are speaking up about the things they need to survive and then are depicted as just being whiny. Shameful sinners, we see disabled people are told that they deserve lesser accommodations or less than full inclusion or access, that they might deserve to be hidden or pitied, or that their exclusion is justified, right? So if you think that a person's disability reflects on their moral character, which is something conjoined in literature quite often, and sort of the eugenics movement tied moral character directly to things like intelligence and being non-disabled across a number of categories. Once those things get read together, it means that sort of we justify exclusion based on those criteria very quickly. I think about this a lot of times around a whole bunch of different disabilities that are read as sinful in different ways. Sometimes it's the sin of the disabled person, sometimes it's the sin of their mother. If we talk about things like the now debunked refrigerator theory, or refrigerator mother theory of autism, which said that you got autism because your mom was too cold to you. Right. This is, thoroughly debunked, but it meant that autistic kids were taken away from their mothers. It meant that their support systems were removed because we did things like this. And then, of course, inspirational overcomers. Disabled people are often tokenized, and we see gatekeepers and disability services professionals like set as heroes, right? Oh, you're helping that person with that shiny new exoskeleton, stand up. But I mean, good luck moving around in the world. I really I teach technology and disability. And one year I had up a picture of an exoskeleton because we were about to talk about them, but the students were all just talking before class. And then I was like, what do you think about this exoskeleton? And one of the students just sat there and looked at it and he goes, how do you poop in that? Which is to say that if you wanted to use the restroom, if you were out and about with your exoskeleton, you were going to have to go get into your wheelchair, go to the bathroom, get back into your wheelchair, and then get back into the exoskeleton. It wasn't something that you could like sit on a toilet with or, otherwise navigate a bathroom because it was so like large and bulky, but it also covered your butt in ways that,
Yeah, I use the exoskeletons, and I don't really think people understand how is the use of exoskeleton in actually, because it's very much connected to a therapy, a kind of therapy. So in a therapeutical context, so it's very different from using in real life, actually.
Yeah. I mean, so many of these things are designed with what non-disabled people think is the problem with disability. So the people who are designing exoskeletons are like, oh, it's so sad people can't stand up and walk around. And for most wheelchair users, yeah, like standing up and walking around might be nice, but like you are disabled, like your disabilities are often more complicated than
Some
that. It's not.
people never walked in life and they were born disabled and they never actually, the body was not, never perceived how it is to be standing. So the way he moves or the way he perceives the world is differently. So.
Yeah. I think about this every time I look at exoskeleton, like as an amputee, I don't think I could wear one. Just straight up, like it wouldn't fit. I don't move in the same way. My knees are not at the same height. So like at the start.
And actually, I'm an adult, and when I try out, they say I need a kid's exoskeleton. So, because my femur was smaller than the rest of my body, so yeah, and actually, you don't perceive anything when you watch me standing or whatever, but it's made in the standardized measures that they perceive the human body. So.
Well, and it's wild to design in standardized ways when you're thinking about a population that is sort of like defined by being non-standard. Like, I don't know, the thought processes that go into that seem really complicated to me, like that you don't know your user group as you go to design and you've made all of these assumptions about people's bodies to start with.
But actually, what you are saying is very much connected to how I feel what is the adaptive world for disabled people. Because, and yeah, I have a question, but maybe for later around this idea of accessibility. And so, but yeah, I feel that this is one of the problems is like it's not really thinking about what the group needs, and most of the time is not made by the community. So community is not involved or is not leading these projects.
Absolutely. And so many times when people go, like even when they want to include users, usually they already have an idea in mind. They've already prototyped, like they're already down the design process before they think, oh, we need to test this. And then they end up like having calls for participants that are like, we need people with autism level 1. Or I've seen this, we need below amputees with at least 2 inches of tibia below the knee. It's like, that's a very specific body type, and usually they exclude if you
And
have
it's not zero virgule. It's a very like kind of the percentage of people that has this is like so small. So
Mhm. Yeah, and most disabled people are multiply disabled or will become multiply disabled earlier. And a lot of our tech design is about only one type of disability, which means that people like end up bringing to market things like glucose monitors. And this is a real example, glucose monitors that only have visual readouts. Well, the thing we know about diabetes is that it causes not just amputations, but it can cause blindness and vision issues. So to have something that only has a visual readout for a disability that we all know, like it needs to have some sort of audio or other feedback mechanism. But the number of glucose monitors that don't actually have that is actually weirdly high in ways that mean that the technology is far less useful for most people or will become less useful as they age with their disability. It's not financially smart, but it's also like really missing out on the way in which disabled people aren't just one type at a time. Yeah. Hmm.
so I don't know how. I was reading a lot also about another thing, but that you study a lot, and this is around the idea of the cyborgs narratives, and also how um, it's still very much connected to a feminist speech, but also to exclude a lot of the disabled narratives or the disabled people. So I was wondering if you could bring a bit of this. I know it's not following the topics, but I've been going around everything you wrote, and I feel like I really would like to ask this.
Yeah, so I think about a lot of theory about cyborgs. I think about the way Donna Haraway talks about cyborgs in the Cyborg Manifesto. And, she says she doesn't want to be, any of these, she doesn't want to be simplified, right? And what is it to be a cyborg? It's to be more complicated. She doesn't want to be celebrated as a goddess, that sort of thinking about hybridity and and resisting binaries is really important. And you can see why resisting some of these binaries would be important in feminism when we talk about, oh, some of these five binaries have been um, like reinforced by gender as a binary. So you have people talking about sort of nature versus culture, and then matching women and men, and then you have like art and engineering, as if those are the only two things that exist. And like everything becomes like enrolled in gender in a particular ways. We can think about this even in, certain professions are seen as more female or male, and that is appropriate. And I can see why cyborg feminism is appealing, right? If you want to resist the being stereotyped in particular ways. And of course, cyborg feminism is a response to ecofeminism, which would say, oh, women in nature have all of these shared characteristics that we ought to care about, and we ought to, you know, elevate the status of women, but also elevate the status of nature. Cyborg feminism says, hey, it's not that we're either nature or technology or culture, however you want to map that. It's that we can be both at once. So it's trying to do this liberatory thing, but at the same time, all of this talk about cyborgs doesn't recognize that there are actual technologized disabled people. Like it's using us as a metaphor in a different way than sort of Peter Pan and Captain Hook do, but it's still taking disabled people as a metaphor. Um, but cyborgs exist and walk among us, or sometimes don't walk among us. These things. It's weird to choose something that we can talk about as already exist. It's weird to choose that as an identity category if you are not a technologized person. And technologized human being that maps onto a lot of disabled people. Some disabled people resist technology. Some disability communities say this isn't appropriate for us. I think about communities that reject technologies that might be on offer as well. But it's still setting up disabled people sort of in the wider culture when we talk about technoableism as like waiting for technological intervention. So I think you end up being read in ways that like presume your cyborgness, or if you're not doing the cyborg thing, you're not being a good disabled person. We're supposed to be volunteering, like as a disabled person with an interesting body and different deficits. And I'm using scare quotes around deficits. Um, I'm supposed to want to participate in technological things, right? If I'm a good disabled person, I'm volunteering for different studies. I'm helping people make better legs. I'm existing, like to be good corresponds with all of these things. And it's a real crapshoot for disabled people, because if I actually volunteer for all of these things, I'm not paid. That could be a whole like lifelong thing. And usually they don't pay you, or they expect you to be grateful for them thinking that you might exist, or grateful for whatever design they're making that you don't actually want because you never wanted an exoskeleton to begin with. It makes us more vulnerable in significant ways. I have some actual like examples that I can run through if you're interested, of high-tech stuff that's been in the past 10 years. Yeah. All right. So I call these cyborg concern examples sometimes. The first one is electronic visit verification. This is a moochers and fakers related thing. In the United States, if you are on benefits such that you need like a personal care attendant. So if you are quadriplegic and need someone to come to your house and put you in your wheelchair each morning and get you ready for the day, or if you're someone who needs different types of nursing care to come into your home, the federal government now requires electronic visit verification, which is a thing where you have a cell phone that the disabled person has to keep on them at all times, and their personal care attendant comes in and logs on the cell phone and logs out at the end of the day. So it's like a time clock, but it's a cell phone that also shares geographic information. So we're tracking disabled people by accident with a lot of these programs, which could play into people doubting whether you need the personal care attendant if you're someplace that they don't think a disabled person should be, like the gym or something like that. Or, if you are discriminated against along other lines.
So
So
you lose your freedom.
yes, you can lose your freedom very easily. And this is all rolled out with the presumption that disabled people are cheating the system, but the amount of fraud is actually very low. And you can see the state of Arkansas, this is on the slide. This is a quote from this article. The state of Arkansas secured only three convictions for personal care services fraud in 2020, recovering a total of $1,930. And as of the first half of 2021, the equipment to give everyone these cell phones for checking in and set up the network cost the state 5.7 million to implement. You tell me who's wasting the money, and it's not disabled people in this case. Next example, the second sight bionic implants, where people had implants in their eyes from this company called Second Sight. The implants are the Argus 2 implants. Um, the company decided to shutter the line before they went out of business completely. And it meant that some people's implants turned off without any warning. This included one person who was literally crossing the street. And these implants, although they don't like restore your vision, they do let you see shadow and light in a way that is helpful for navigating the world. And now the company, all these people are left with equipment in their eyes that makes it so they can't have an MRI without having it removed, and the company doesn't exist to appeal to. Or so these people are taking the fancy new objects and are left off worse for it. Um,
This is really scary, so I don't even know what to say.
I have more. All right, here's a cochlear implant that was sold by a US company, but it was designed for lower income countries. And India bought a whole bunch of them to implant. This is considered like a humanitarian thing for this company to do, was make these cochlear implants at a lower cost and they were implanted in a whole bunch of Indian children. Michelle Friedner, who is in disability studies, who wrote this article, who pays the price when cochlear implants go obsolete, talks about the way in which she like interviews some of the Indian families. Kids were implanted. She talks to one implantee who was 4 years old when he got the implant. He is 8 at the time that she is doing this story, and they have decided that they will not be, the company has shuttered the line, has decided that it wasn't lucrative, didn't make enough money on it. It was supposed to be for lower income countries to begin with. They decided they didn't make enough money and said that if people would like to keep using cochlear implants, they could pay to get a new model implanted. But of course, these were for lower income Indian families and paid for it by the government. And now they no longer have support. And if there's any problem, where things wear out, there's no recompense. And in fact, over the 4 years that this one child had had the cochlear, it was their main form of understanding and communicating. So you're not
And it's
just,
also the way you are growing to perceiving a world in a way that then you can no longer perceive. And adjusting these devices is not so simple as changing a wheelchair. And even when I change my wheelchair, I get back pain or whatever. So I cannot even imagine
yeah.
how complex this it is.
All right, another case, lots of diabetes, insulin pumps, different types of temporary outages, different like software problems pop up. And these pumps are great and lots of people like them, right? But it is one of those things where we are seeing at least a few incidents um, we're having sort of a blackout of or an update. There was one update that was not on this slide, but it was running down the battery like more quickly in a way that people didn't plan for, in a way that, left them with gaps of coverage in terms of glucose monitoring as well. We're supposed to want the latest gadgety thing. And you can see that the uptake of the latest gadgeting thing leaves people worse off and is often more expensive. There's also the case of Rita Leggett. This is in 2013. She's an Australian woman who received an experimental brain implant to help with severe chronic epilepsy. She was one of the human testers that was recruited in a cohort. She talks about it as a life-changing technology, right? It would give her a warning before she was going to have her seizure so that she could get in a safer place. And before this, she had pretty much decided to not go out and do things because she had been in situations where she had like seizures on a bus and like was left in ways that were dangerous and left her very vulnerable. So she gets this brain implant as part of this study. She has these life-changing results. The other people in the study do not have the same dramatic results that she does. And they decided to no longer do research in this direction. So this company, NeuroVista, was not making the money that they wanted to. And they told participants to have their implants removed. Um, and she was forced into surgery to have it removed against her will. And she tried like legal actions and things to get to keep the life changes. This is when it works. And it's something that she wanted. She's still left much more vulnerable, and sort of the difference in her life since then is quite dramatic. There's also all these sorts of surveillance AI and education and hiring that we're seeing where, oh, we're going to eye track and facial read. And this is one report from the Center for Democracy and Technology: algorithm-driven hiring tools, innovative recruitment, or expedited disability discrimination. We're seeing all of these things roll out, especially with people interested in Gen AI right now, that have things that they're applying to disability in ways that are going to be incredibly harmful. In fact, because disability data is often not very reflective of what disabled people would say about themselves in their lives. A lot of it involves sort of ableism and categorization and an understanding that comes from medical professionals and not disabled people themselves. So disabled people often value their lives to the degree that other people do um, about their own lives. But often different measures end up situating disabled people as less valuable, as having fewer quality of life living years, etc., um, in ways that can be really tricky in healthcare. But then we're also seeing in education and hiring these things roll out. So I think about these cases quite a lot because I feel like they're warning cases. One's about infrastructure and how we think about disabled people. A couple of them are about implantables and things we put in our bodies. And then sort of a third set around like the sort of infrastructure, digital infrastructure that is affecting disabled people. And through all of these cases, and there are a lot more than this. This is the boiled down version of that I think are the ones that keep me up at night. I think about Rita Leggett's brain implant all the time. All of these disabled people,
Violent. It's so violent. I don't even.
so violent, and the sort of involuntary, like, oh, you're going to have invasive surgery against your will. That part of it, like, it's
And
it's
this is so mixing about human rights and also like I don't even know like, but it's a great example when someone show you something that they think it's remarkable. Like sometimes a lot of people, because I have a spinal cord injury, people show me surgeries of spinal cord injury that a very minimum number of people become normative. So it's a very complex feelings because I already improved so much through my injury, and I'm so adapted to my body. Even that is still changing through time, that I'm not even going to will to put myself in a position that I don't know what's going to happen after, and I can become even much more worse. So I feel so much thinking about this when I see these.
and in all of in at least the implant cases, these disabled people were like following like along the lines of what our culture would tell them to do, and like in ways that are helpful, like people who got the Argus 2 wanted them, no doubt. But they're more vulnerable for participating in the infrastructure, and especially when these things are managed by corporations and governments. Um, the data that they end up collecting about us, and the ways in which that could be weaponized, and I think weaponized in terms of, especially with the moochers and fakers trope. Oh, you're like the cyborg Jillian Visa talks about being afraid of walking too much in the computerized knee that Psy has. Because if Psy walks too much, they'll have the number of steps and they'll go, well, you don't need this. But if Psy walks too little, they'll also say that Psy doesn't need that. Right? So there's like a real Goldilocks problem, right? It's too much, it's too little, but you don't know what the parameters actually are for this technology that you would like to keep. Um, and that's a good technology, and it's still leaving you more vulnerable.
But because technology is very much connected still to a medical model that is um, not very much connected to the social model, so I feel like this is very much struggle in between. I have another question, if you don't mind. That in one of your chapters in the book, that I would like to show the case because it's really beautiful, of your book.
Oh,
And you talk that that made me rethink many issues related to disability studies, and it was accessible futures, and begins by presenting this techno-futuristic narrative juxtaposing with the future is disabled. And since the experience of people with disabilities is so deeply shaped by urban planning and excludes so many, I'd like to revisit this important chapter that you wrote about rethinking the future, if you don't mind.
oh, I don't mind at all. So I have some relevant slides. Let me see. Here we are. Uh, Yeah. So the future is going to be disabled. And this is not my like original observation. This is something that Alice Wong has talked about, and it's even the name of one of Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samarasina's more recent books. So the future is disabled. And what do we mean by the future is disabled? I I'm not alone in my observation that climate change is changing our planet and changing our bodies. I think about the work of Sonora Taylor about disabled ecologies, like we are living and dealing with ecologies that we as humans have disabled. And it produces disability in human beings, including when we think about like changing weather patterns and what that means. Like we have tick-borne diseases and malaria in different places than it's ever existed before. We have different zoonotic diseases that are crossing over in ways because of different animal migration and caused by weather change. I think about sort of the large climate disaster events that produce disability, and perhaps more understandable, like legible disability isn't physical disabilities. But we also have different pollutants causing higher levels of asthma. And there's like so many ways in which we might stack, oh, the future is going to be more disabled. Like even in the absence of things like COVID, where we have lots of people with long COVID, and we don't actually understand what the lengthier future of that will be. And here I think about how chickenpox as a child means that you can get shingles 30, 50 years later. Right? I think about the fact that we know that multiple sclerosis is linked to oh, I'm going to forget what it is. But there's a virus that a lot of people have as kids that is linked to MS now. Like we don't know what the long-term impact of COVID will be. So even outside of that conversation, I think I think because we think techno-optimistically sometimes, there are stories about technology and science are that they're on a course to save us. And certainly I like science and technology. I don't deny that. But we have a sense because of how we've changed the world, we will have more disabled people in the future, not less. And that's a hard like speed bump to go over if you've never thought about that. But also even in our like best versions of the future, by which I mean mostly Star Trek. Even if we get radical space communism that allows us to care only about exploration and everyone is well fed and taken care of in our society, um, our best version, if we get off our planet, being in lower gravity affects our bodies in ways that Star Trek does not account for at all. A lot of our science fiction narratives have not prepared us for the fact that if we get off planet or if we experience lower gravity, it's going to have a lot of physiological effects on us. And we know things about this from people who have been on the International Space Station for like longer periods of time, where they come back to Earth where their vision has changed because of the pressure in their eyes. That's common. It'll eventually fix itself, but it is not, immediate. People get osteoporosis. If you are an astronaut, you spend a lot of time exercising in space, and it's not as good as the exercise you do on Earth, which is why you have to do so much of it. Right? Like our ability to like keep our bones dense enough is a real issue. All of these things mean that we're going to have a more disabled future, even if it's a good future. And we're making it a worse future by not planning for disability. Disability can be seen as a resource for understanding the future. Alice Wong calls us oracles of the future. But there's a real resource in thinking about disability as a creative and adaptive force that helps us actually plan better for the future in which all people can live and are included. So many of our science fiction stories don't have disabled people in them because it's just assumed disability is gone. And that's poor imagination. But it also means that a lot of the time when we're doing planning about the future and even like who gets to go to space and who gets to be in sort of elite spaces in general, we have often, deselected for disability at those points. And I think about this disability as a resource really seriously. I think about how Rosemary Garland Thompson talks about disability as a narrative and epistemic resource. Sort of our knowledge about the world improves when we have this situated knowledge that disabled people and different types of disability bring to our understanding of the world, of infrastructure, of how things could be different and fit more people in them in more satisfying ways. I think about this in terms of like a narrative resource that she talks about where people's understanding of like the human condition is expanded by understanding disability and valuing disability positively. And I think this means a lot for our art projects. I think about, a lot of times we're told that we need to tolerate people who are different from us. Not accept, tolerate, or how we want people to assimilate with a dominant culture, or about how, we have to like make exceptions for and make accommodations for, disabled people if we want to be included or if we want them included at all. But disability offers ways of understanding the world and of planning for the future that everyone needs because we all will be disabled if we live on this planet in the context of climate change long enough. Um, and there are unique ways of thinking, perceiving, and being, and understanding and processing. I think about the deaf community talking about deaf gain in opposition to hearing loss, like that there's some understanding about the world and about communication and about community that's only possible and about technology that's only possible in thinking about like what the experience of deafness can actually offer to you. I think about some of this in the neurodiversity movement, and which is sort of a large umbrella term that refers to anybody who thinks or processes information differently. So it includes people with intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, people with acquired neurodivergent conditions like traumatic brain injuries, and people with MS, and people with CP always count, cerebral palsy, because that in fact it looks like it's a mobility disability, but in fact, it has to do with how your brain is working in many ways. So the neurodiversity is this large category that talks about like making spaces and processes and information that is more readily accessible to all sorts of people. And the sort of dreaming that comes from doing design work with deafness in mind, with deaf people, and the sort of design work that follows from the neurodiversity movement, I think is really significant in creating spaces and places, not just where neurodivergent people can exist, but in fact are more comfortable for everybody. And some of that involves like some of the flexibility in design. Some of it involves like like having the ability to control like lighting levels and things like that, because you don't want to have fluorescent lights that set off people's, you know, seizures and things like that. Like some of it's small tweaks. It's not all just like ramps and elevators. It is, let's replace the light bulbs and make this dimmable, that kind of thing. And thinking about some of like the other sensory pieces, I think about what this means to creating spaces where you don't have to be non-disabled to participate, and what it means when we do this as disabled communities. And this is what I really like about talking to people in the arts, because you guys have imagination beyond what I do. First, what some of this looks like a lot of my work is critique about technology, but to actually imagine these futures and to imagine disabled bodies as good bodies, which is like a real barrier for a lot of creative thinking on the parts of all people when it comes to disability, like is really opened up by artistic work. And yeah, I'm gonna pause because
You talked a lot about some art scenes invalid or the deaf poet community, I think, in the book, and I was. It's something that is not so known here in Europe, so I was really happy to read it in the book, because also I feel like when I'm working in my pieces, I need to rethink how I see. I don't know, like since I wasn't born with a disability, something that really bothered me in society is that people didn't allow me to do things in my own way. So I needed, if I was a quadriplegic, I needed to learn how you do as a quadriplegic. Or if you take more time to do things in a different way, people will do for you. Or then if you dance and you are in an inclusive dance practice, you need to do things in a particular way of dance vocabulary that is very much hierarchical and very much connected to a shape and very much less about what your body wants to do. So I think this process of finding yourself also in the art sector with a disability is also very much of fighting against a lot of assumptions of what a body should do and what how you should be around in the world. So I feel like, yeah, you need to be creative, but also there is something about resilience and also about kind of being critic also in the world.
Yeah. No, I feel like a lot of disabled artwork that I get to see opens my own, like, lets me see my own prejudice in some way. Like, I am a disabled person. I think about these things quite often, but I don't think about sometimes like the beautiful and interesting ways our bodies can move and perform, just because I'm not in performance spaces as often, that I'm always just bowled over by the things that disabled people create and do, like in the face of a world that tells us to be otherwise, or discourages particular types of enacting. Yeah.
I don't know, I was like, I think also it's such an important voice in stage, to have different kinds of representation and ways of perceiving the other, because I think we are all the time like with so much of these separation stories around disability or inspirational porn narratives, or very much about understanding the utopic body as a normative body patterns that works in a very simple and not really unique way, but actually if you go deeply, you see that there is much more identity if you allow the body to be whatever he is. So I don't know, I've been traveling around this, also bringing new ways and devices to understand how to work the body besides the wheelchairs or crutches or whatever in my pieces, and to understand how you fight gravity or things more complex in physical laws of understanding how bodies connects and reacts and are perceived on
No,
stage.
your work is so cool. All of the visuals that I've seen from these performances, I feel like sometimes people don't recognize that disability comes with all the range of emotions, that we can feel joy and like more complicated things than that. And I feel like it's actually hard to think about some of these things with words. And the way in which you use your body in some of these performances like shows this sort of range that it's hard to capture otherwise. And that's how I feel about some poetry as well. Like I don't know how they say things. Like I think about dance as like visual poetry in a particular way. And so these things show disabled brilliance in a way that I think people don't often encounter and should encounter much more than they do.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been struggling a bit with sets and the sceneries, So I've really, when you bring all this information around technology in your thoughts and in your books, and I've been thinking a lot around this because one of my struggles is most of the time I work with non-disabled people. So when the device arrives, or when my pendulum or carousel or whatever arrives, it needs to be adjusted. But although people that are doing it, they are not disabled, so their understanding of a disabled body is very minimal. So there is this moment that you see the gap of understanding bodies that is very different. So I also feel is something that puts me, okay, we are starting again this conversation. And I feel like talking about this, also it made me a lot of rethinking the body and how I connect with technology, and how more deep and complex these terms and topics arrives. So I'm really thankful for this conversation, Ashley. And I don't know if you would like to say something else, but I'm really thankful for having this time with you.
Oh, I'm so grateful for this conversation and to have gotten to spend time with you as well and some of your work. Thank you so much.